The email from Netflix arrived 3 hours before my sister called my career a pathetic joke in front of 50 dinner guests. I'm Mia Anderson, 28 years old, and this is how I learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply letting people face the consequences of underestimating you. What happened at my father's 65th birthday changed everything between my family and me, but not in the way anyone expected. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. It started at my father's 65th birthday dinner at the Ritz-Carlton, where I kept that $2 million contract in my pocket throughout the entire humiliation. The Anderson name carries weight in Boston. My father, Richard Anderson, built his construction empire from a single crane to a $500 million company that reshapes skylines. Walking into any Anderson family event means walking into a carefully orchestrated display of success. That night, at the Ritz-Carlton's private dining room, crystal chandeliers cast perfect light on perfect people. My mother Helen floated between guests in her Saint Laurent dress, playing the gracious hostess she'd perfected over 35 years of marriage. The reserved parking spots outside bore our name. The staff knew our preferences by heart. And then there was Caroline. My older sister arrived fashionably late, of course, her Hermes Kelly bag announcing her presence before she did. At 32, she'd made partner at Whitman and Associates faster than anyone in the firm's history. The Wall Street Journal had just featured her in their Legal Minds Under 40 series. She wore success like her Patek Philippe watch, obviously, effortlessly, constantly. "There's my superstar," Dad beamed as Caroline kissed his cheek. He turned to introduce her to his business associates. Caroline just closed the Pemberton merger, saved them $40 million in regulatory fees. I sat at the far end of the table, in what our family calls the children's section, despite being nearly 30. In the Anderson family, your seat at the table literally reflected your worth. Caroline sat at Dad's right hand. I sat between distant cousins and plus ones. "And Mia?" someone asked politely. Dad's pause said everything. "She's finding herself." Caroline's laugh cut through the awkward silence. "She makes videos on the internet." I smiled and sipped my water, feeling the weight of the email in my pocket. Caroline had claimed the entire east wall of Dad's office for her achievements: Harvard law diploma, Supreme Court admission, photos with senators, CEOs, even a Supreme Court justice. Each frame positioned perfectly, lit like a museum exhibit. My achievements? Dad once asked if I needed help paying for a real career. 3 years ago, I'd tried the traditional path. Pre-med at Johns Hopkins, following the Anderson playbook. But when I switched to media studies and launched my first startup, a wellness app for young women, the family treated it like a temporary breakdown. When it failed after burning through $200,000 of my savings and investor money, Caroline made sure everyone remembered. "Remember when Mia maxed out her credit cards for that app thing?" Caroline mentioned casually as dessert arrived. "Dad had to bail her out of that studio apartment in Chinatown." The truth was more complex, but Caroline never let complexity interfere with a good story. What puzzled me that night was her intensity. Carolyn had everything: the corner office, the seven-figure salary, the engagement ring from a federal judge's son. Yet she kept glancing at her phone with the kind of anxiety I recognized. The kind that comes when you're waiting for news that could destroy everything. "Caroline, everything all right?" our mother asked. "Perfect," Caroline said, but her Centurion card trembled slightly as she signed for another bottle of Dom Perignon. "Just some client emails." I knew that look. I'd worn it myself when my startup was failing. But what could possibly threaten Caroline Anderson, the golden child who'd never failed at anything? She caught me watching, and her expression hardened. "At least I don't have to check if my credit card will decline, right, Mia?" Unmuted voices started in my Chinatown studio apartment with a USB microphone and desperation. After my startup failed, I couldn't afford therapy, so I talked to the internet instead. Turned out, millions of women wanted to hear someone admit that success isn't always linear, that failure doesn't define you, that family expectations can suffocate dreams. 15 million subscribers later, I was earning six figures monthly from sponsorships alone. Spotify exclusive deals. Speaking engagements. I turned down to maintain independence. My audience didn't know my last name, and I kept it that way. They knew me as just Mia, the voice that got them through commutes, workouts, breakdowns, and breakthroughs. My family never asked about my work beyond dismissive comments. Still playing with your little internet show? Dad would say. When are you getting a real job? Caroline would add. So I stopped sharing. They didn't know about the Netflix email from Marcus Chen, their senior director of documentary programming, that arrived that afternoon. They didn't know about the contract negotiations I'd been handling myself for 3 months. They didn't know that Forbes had been trying to profile me for weeks. The email in my pocket wasn't just an offer. It was confirmation of a done deal. $2 million for Unmuted, Asian Women Rising, a documentary series where I'd interview female leaders across Asia Pacific, executive produced and hosted by me. Global release in 3 weeks. You know, Caroline said, loud enough for the whole table, it's embarrassing when people ask what my sister does. She talks to her phone, doesn't exactly inspire confidence. I touched my pocket, feeling the folded paper. They never asked about my work. They were about to find out anyway. Richard Anderson stood, raising his Baccarat crystal glass filled with Dom Perignon, 1996. The room quieted, 50 guests turning toward the patriarch. 65 years, he began, voice carrying that CEO authority. I've built an empire, found the perfect wife, and raised successful children. His gaze found Caroline. Well, one of them anyway. Nervous laughter rippled through the room. I kept my expression neutral, years of practice paying off. Caroline just made history at her firm, youngest female partner, following in the Anderson tradition of excellence. He paused, seemed to remember I existed. And Mia, well, she's here. More laughter, less nervous this time. A guest, trying to be kind, asked, Mia, what exactly do you do? Before I could answer, Caroline cut in. She plays pretend on the internet, talking to her phone about feelings. She turned to me with that shark smile. How many followers do you have now? 1,000? Something like that, I said quietly. It's actually embarrassing, Caroline continued, emboldened by wine and an audience. I'm negotiating billion-dollar deals while my little sister makes TikToks or whatever. It's a podcast, I corrected. Oh, right, even more outdated. Caroline laughed. At least you're consistent, Mia, consistently disappointing. The room had gone uncomfortable now, some guests studying their plates, others watching with the morbid fascination of witnessing a car crash. My mother made a soft sound of protest, but Dad silenced her with a look. Caroline's right, he said. Some people are meant to shine. Others, well, they try their best. I stood to leave, but Caroline wasn't done. She had that gleam in her eye, the one that meant she was going for the kill. Sit down, Mia, Caroline commanded. We're not done celebrating Dad's birthday. I remained standing, but Caroline had already turned to her captive audience. You want to know this best part about my sister's career? She made air quotes around the word. Dad's been supplementing her rent for 3 years. Tell them about the time Mia begged for grocery money, Dad. Richard chuckled, warming to the theme. Last Christmas, she needed $3,000 for equipment, probably another microphone for her hobby. It had actually been for hosting fees and platform development, but I didn't correct him. Still living in that studio apartment? Caroline asked, though she knew the answer. The one with the shared bathroom? God, how do you bring anyone home to that? 50 pairs of eyes turned to me with mixtures of pity and secondhand embarrassment. A woman in Chanel whispered to her husband. A business partner of Dad's actually shook his head. Remember the startup? Caroline was relentless now. $200,000. Gone. Investors furious. Credit destroyed. If it wasn't for Dad's connections, she'd probably be bankrupt. Caroline, my mother tried weakly. Perhaps we should. What, Mom? Pretend Mia isn't a failure? She's 28 and playing make-believe while her peers run companies. Caroline's phone buzzed again. She glanced at it, and for a second, fear flashed across her face before she recovered. At least I've never had to ask Dad to pay my Con Edison bill. One guest, an elderly woman I didn't recognize, shook her head disapprovingly, but at whom I couldn't tell. The rest seemed frozen, uncertain whether to intervene or let the blood sport continue. Richard Anderson laughed, the sound echoing off the private room's walls. You know what the problem is? Mia's always been the failure of the family. Even as a kid, Caroline won science fairs while Mia played with her imaginary friends. They were characters for stories, I said quietly. Stories, podcasts, whatever you call it, it's all pretend. He addressed the room like a keynote speaker. I have 2 daughters. One's a Harvard law partner who bills $2,000 an hour. The other talks to herself on the internet and can't pay rent. It's like having a winner and a participation trophy. The room erupted in uncomfortable laughter. Some guests genuinely amused, others laughing because the alternative was too awkward. I saw Mr. Harrison, one of Dad's oldest friends, frown deeply and whisper to his wife. She looked at me with something like sympathy. I stood to leave again, my legs surprisingly steady. Where are you going? Dad called out. Can't handle the truth? I need some air. Running away, as usual, Caroline added. This is why you'll never amount to anything, Mia. You can't even handle a family dinner. But as I reached the door, Caroline suddenly stood, blocking my path. Her phone was buzzing insistently now, and that fear was back in her eyes. Actually, wait, she said, her voice shifting to something artificially sweet. Before you go, I need to talk to you, privately. The room watched us, tension thick. My mother looked between us nervously. Dad seemed annoyed at the interruption of his humiliation show. It'll just take a minute, Caroline insisted, gripping my arm. Family business. If you've ever been dismissed by your own family, you know this feeling. The way your chest tightens, your hands shake, but you have to keep smiling. I see you, and your struggles are valid. Before we continue, please hit subscribe if this resonates. Share in the comments. Have you ever been the black sheep? Your stories give others strength. Now, let me tell you what happened next. Caroline dragged me into the hotel's empty conference room next door, her manicured nails digging into my arm. She closed the door and immediately pulled out a folder from her bag. Sign this, she said, spreading legal documents on the table. I looked down. Inheritance waiver. Relinquishment of all claims to the Anderson estate. You're joking. I need this signed tonight. Her voice had lost all its earlier cruelty, replaced by desperation. I need to secure a $10 million loan for a project, and the bank wants assurance about the estate's future distribution. I scanned the document. According to Dad's current will, everything was to be split equally between us. Caroline needed my share as collateral. You want me to sign away my inheritance so you can borrow money? You don't need it anyway, she said quickly. What are you going to do with millions? Buy a better microphone? I'm building something real, Mia. A new firm. This is my chance to go independent. And if I don't sign? Her face hardened. Then I'll make sure Dad writes you out completely. You think tonight was bad? I have 3 years of financial records showing every time you've begged for money. One presentation to his lawyers and you're out anyway. At least this way, you get to leave with dignity. I noticed something in the fine print, the equal distribution clause. It had been notarized just last month. Dad had recently updated his will to ensure fairness, probably at Mom's insistence. You need this tonight because the loan committee meets tomorrow, I said, understanding dawning. Just sign it, Mia. It's not like you'll ever amount to anything requiring capital. Caroline didn't wait for my answer. She grabbed the documents and marched back into the dining room, with me following. The conversation stopped as she held up the papers. Good news, everyone, she announced. Mia's finally contributing to the family legacy. She placed the inheritance waiver on the table, pulling out her Mont Blanc pen with a flourish. The legal letterhead was visible to everyone nearby. "What's this about?" someone asked. "Mia's doing the smart thing," Dad interjected, clearly briefed on Caroline's plan. "She's acknowledging that some people are builders and others are supporters. It's for the best." "Sign it, Mia." Caroline pushed the pen toward me. "Unless you have some secret fortune we don't know about?" The room laughed. All eyes were on me, waiting. The weight of their expectation, their amusement at my expense, their certainty that I would comply. It was suffocating. My mother finally spoke up. "Perhaps this isn't the time." "It's the perfect time," Dad cut her off. "Witnesses for the notarization." I picked up the pen, felt its weight. Caroline's phone buzzed again. A text preview flashed. "Need confirmation tonight, or deal is dead." "Everyone's watching, Mia," Caroline said, her voice tight. "Don't embarrass yourself more than you already have." I looked at the signature line, then I set the pen down. "I need time to review this with my lawyer." The room went silent. "Your lawyer?" Caroline laughed, but it sounded forced. "What lawyer? You can't even afford rent." "I don't sign anything without proper legal review," I said calmly, leaving the documents on the table. "That's just good business, something you taught me, actually." I pushed the documents back across the table toward Caroline. Her face cycled through disbelief, anger, and something close to panic. "You're seriously going to be this petty?" she hissed. "It's not petty to read legal documents," I replied, keeping my voice level. "If it's really in my best interest, it'll still be good tomorrow." "What's to review?" Caroline's voice rose. "You get nothing either way. At least this way you're helping the family." "Then there's no rush, is there?" Dad stood, his face red. "Sign the papers, Mia. Stop being selfish for once in your life." I said I need time to review them. The silence stretched. 50 guests watched this power struggle, some uncomfortable, others fascinated. Caroline's phone buzzed continuously now. "You're going to regret this," Caroline said quietly. "Maybe," I said, gathering my coat. "But I'll regret it on my own terms." As I walked toward the door, an older gentleman I didn't recognize intercepted me. He pressed a business card into my hand discreetly. "You handled that well," he whispered. "Call me if you need representation." I nodded, pocketed the card without looking at it, and left the Ritz-Carlton. The October air hit my face, cold and clarifying. My phone vibrated. A text from Marcus Chen at Netflix. "Saw what happened. Moving timeline up. Documentary premieres at UNESCO Gala in 3 weeks. You ready?" I typed back, "Ready?" Behind me, through the windows, I could see Caroline gesturing frantically, Dad's face purple with rage, and Mom sitting quietly, staring at her hands. Let them wonder what I knew. They'd find out soon enough. The calls started the next morning. Caroline left 17 voicemails, each more threatening than the last. "You're being ridiculous." Dad's furious. "I'll make sure you never see a penny." "You're cut off from everything." "Answer your fucking phone, Mia." Dad's approach was different. Official emails from his lawyer, cold, corporate. "Your recent actions have consequences. The family is prepared to formally exclude you from all financial considerations unless you reconsider." I didn't respond to any of it. Instead, I focused on work. 14-hour days preparing for the UNESCO Gala, script reviews with Marcus, interview scheduling with world leaders, media training, though I'd been doing this for 3 years without anyone knowing. My silence drove them crazy. Caroline showed up at my apartment building twice. The doorman, who'd been listening to my podcast for 2 years, told her I was traveling. Dad sent Mom as an emissary, but I genuinely was in meetings when she came by. "Your sister's having difficulties," Mom texted. "The family needs unity right now." What she didn't say, Caroline's loan fell through. Her plan to launch an independent firm was crumbling. Without my signature, the banks wouldn't budge. 2 weeks into my silence, something interesting happened. Robert Harrison, Dad's oldest friend and board member reached out, not to pressure me, but to apologize for that night. Your father's lost perspective, he said. The boards noticed. Week 3 arrived. The UNESCO gala was tomorrow. Caroline's texts had shifted from threats to bargaining. Can we talk, please? I finally responded. See you at the Waldorf tomorrow night. You're all on the guest list. What's at the Waldorf? Silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. 3 months before that birthday dinner, I'd sat in Netflix's Los Angeles office, trying not to shake as Marcus Chen slid the contract across the table. $2 million for season 1, he said. Full creative control. Executive producer credit. We're calling it Unmuted, Asian Women Rising. The show would feature 12 episodes, each profiling a different female leader across Asia Pacific. Presidents, CEOs, activists, artists, women who'd been silenced, underestimated, dismissed, and who'd built empires anyway. Why me? I'd asked. Because you've built an audience of 15 million without a marketing budget, major platform support, or family connections. You did it by being authentic. That's what we want. The contract included global distribution rights, merchandise, potential expansion into multiple seasons. The emails between Netflix, legal, and me filled 3 folders. Every negotiation, every term, every detail, documented. What made it even sweeter was a detail I'd discovered during due diligence. Caroline's firm, Whitman and Associates, had pitched Netflix for their legal representation 6 months ago. They'd been rejected. The feedback which Marcus accidentally let slip. Too traditional, not aligned with our values. I'd kept everything quiet, even from friends. The NDA was tight until the premiere date, but more than that, I wanted to prove something to myself first, that this was real, that I'd earned it without the Anderson name or money. The contract was dated 3 months before that dinner, before Caroline's public humiliation, before Dad called me a failure. I'd been sitting on a $2 million deal while they laughed at my pretend internet job. The premiere was set for the UNESCO gala. Netflix's PR team had everything planned. The announcement would be global, simultaneous, unmissable. Dr. Sarah Williams, director of UNESCO's youth program, had reached out personally 2 months ago. The official letterhead alone would have given Dad a heart attack. The United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization wanted his failure daughter as their youth ambassador for women's education. Your podcast episode on education access in rural Cambodia changed policy, Dr. Williams explained. The Ministry of Education cited your interview with those female students. You're not just talking, Mia. You're creating change. The gala at the Waldorf Astoria would host 500 guests. Diplomats, Fortune 500 CEOs, media moguls, heads of state. The theme? Voices that shape tomorrow. I'd be speaking between the Secretary General and a Nobel laureate. The invitation list was my responsibility for 50 seats. I could have been petty, excluded my family entirely. Instead, I did something better. I sent them invitations on UNESCO's official letterhead, addressed to the Anderson family, courtesy of Mia Anderson. I knew they'd come. Caroline out of curiosity, Dad out of disbelief, Mom out of hope. They'd assume it was some minor role, maybe introducing someone important. They'd dress to impress, arrive fashionably late, expect to watch me fail on a global stage. The invitation included a subtle detail they'd miss. The program timeline showing a special presentation by Netflix during my speaking slot. They wouldn't understand the significance until they were sitting in that ballroom, surrounded by the world's elite, watching their dismissed daughter command the stage. Dr. Williams had asked if I wanted to review the guest list, perhaps remove anyone who might make me uncomfortable. No, I'd said. I want them there. They're part of the story. The best response to disrespect isn't anger, it's excellence. For 3 weeks, I maintained complete radio silence on social media about the family drama. Reporters who'd somehow heard whispers got nothing. My 15 million followers saw only my regular content. Interviews with remarkable women, discussions on resilience, meditations on success. Caroline hired a private investigator. I know because he approached my doorman, who immediately told me. She was desperate to understand what I was planning, what leverage I might have. The PI found nothing because there was nothing to find. Just a woman working 18-hour days on something her family couldn't imagine. I turned down 3 major interviews that week, including one with Oprah's network. The Netflix PR team was confused. This could build incredible buzz, they argued. The work should speak for itself, I replied. Meanwhile, I crafted my UNESCO speech with surgical precision. No mention of family drama, no vindictive revelations. Instead, 20 minutes on how dismissal becomes fuel, how being underestimated is a strategic advantage, how the voices that matter aren't always the loudest, they're the most persistent. 2 days before the gala, Caroline cracked. She sent a final email. Whatever you're planning, we can work this out. The family doesn't need public embarrassment. I almost responded, almost told her that not everything was about her, that my success didn't exist to spite her, but silence had brought me this far. The night before the gala, I stood in my studio apartment, yes, the same one she'd mocked, looking at my dress for tomorrow. It wasn't designer, wasn't borrowed. I'd bought it myself with money I'd earned talking to my phone. Tomorrow would change everything. Power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet confidence of knowing your worth while others guess. If someone in your life needs to hear this story, please share it with them. And if you're that person who's been underestimated, remember, your time is coming. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss what happens at the gala. Trust me, the revelation is worth it. The Waldorf Astoria's grand ballroom glittered with more wealth than most countries' GDP. Red carpet, international photographers, security that made the White House look casual. I arrived early, walking the carpet alone while cameras flashed politely, not knowing who I was yet. Inside, massive screens displayed the evening's program. My name appeared between the UN Secretary General and a Nobel Peace Prize winner. Mia Anderson, keynote speaker and special presentation. The Anderson family arrived 40 minutes later in their typical formation, Dad leading, Caroline at his right, Mom trailing. They'd come in the company Bentley, making an entrance they thought mattered. Caroline wore Oscar de la Renta, her Bulgari diamonds catching every light. They stopped cold when they saw the welcome poster. My face, 3 feet tall, smiling from a UNESCO banner. Featured speaker, Mia Anderson, voice of a generation. What the hell? Caroline grabbed Dad's arm. They were ushered to table 3, prominent enough to see everything, too visible to leave without causing a scene. I watched from backstage as they sat, Caroline frantically Googling my name plus UNESCO. Her face paled with each search result. Richard's business partners were scattered throughout the room. The mayor sat 2 tables over. The president of Harvard, Caroline's alma mater, chatted with Dr. Williams near the stage. The CEO of the media conglomerate that Caroline's firm desperately wanted as a client held court at table 1. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice filled the room. Please take your seats. Tonight's program will begin momentarily with a special presentation that will be broadcast globally. Caroline's head snapped up. Globally? I adjusted my microphone, ready for my entrance. Dr. Sarah Williams took the stage, commanding immediate silence from 500 of the world's most powerful people. Tonight, we honor voices that shape our future. Our next speaker represents 15 million young women across the globe. Her podcast, Unmuted Voices, has become the largest independent platform for female empowerment, reaching listeners in 190 countries. I watched my family from the wings. Dad's mouth had fallen open. Caroline gripped her champagne glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. She's interviewed presidents, Nobel laureates, and grassroots activists. Her episode on education access in Cambodia led to policy reform. Her series on workplace discrimination changed corporate practices at Fortune 500 companies. She did this without institutional support, family funding, or traditional media backing. The screens around the room lit up with statistics, download numbers that rivaled major networks, impact metrics that made traditional media look obsolete, photos of me with world leaders I'd never mentioned to my family. But tonight, she begins a new chapter. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Netflix's newest documentary host and UNESCO's Youth Ambassador for Women's Education, Mia Anderson. The room erupted in applause. 500 people rose to their feet, standing ovation before I'd said a single word. I walked onto the stage, passing table 3. Caroline had gone pale. Dad looked like he'd been slapped. Mom was crying, though I couldn't tell if it was pride or shame. In the audience, I spotted 3 of Caroline's biggest clients, her law firm's managing partner, the federal judge whose son she was engaged to, all standing, applauding, for the sister she'd called a failure 3 weeks ago. "Thank you," I said into the microphone, and the room settled. "Let me tell you about voices that go unheard." "Before I speak," I said, "Netflix has something to share with you." The lights dimmed. The massive screen behind me illuminated with the Netflix logo, that familiar sound filling the ballroom. Then, my face appeared in cinematic quality, sitting across from the president of Singapore. "What would you tell your younger self?" I asked her on screen. "That the voices dismissing you are often the ones most afraid of your potential," she replied. The trailer for Unmuted Asian Women Rising played for 2 minutes. Me with tech CEOs in Tokyo, activists in Mumbai, artists in Seoul. The production value was stunning. This wasn't some YouTube series. This was prestige television. Marcus Chen's voice narrated, a $2 million production, premiering in 190 countries, hosted by the woman Forbes calls the most influential voice you've never heard of. The camera at the gala found my family's table. Caroline had gone white. Her phone was buzzing incessantly. I could see it lighting up from the stage. Later, I'd learn her firm's biggest client was texting her. "Your sister? The Mia from Unmuted Voices? Why didn't you tell us?" The trailer ended with the release date, premiering tonight, immediately following this event. The room exploded in applause again. Dr. Williams returned to the podium briefly. "This partnership between UNESCO and Netflix will fund education for 1 million girls across Asia," and it started with one woman talking into a microphone in her studio apartment. I saw Richard's business partners lean over to him, clearly asking questions. His face was purple, whether from embarrassment or rage, I couldn't tell. One of them was shaking his head, and I could read his lips. "You said she was unemployed?" I stood at the podium, looking directly at table 3. 3 weeks ago, someone told me I'd never amount to anything, that my voice was a joke, my work embarrassing, my dreams pretend. I paused, letting the words settle. They weren't wrong about one thing. I do talk to my phone. 15 million people listen when I do. Nervous laughter rippled through the room. Success isn't inherited, it's created. It doesn't come from the right last name or the right connections. It comes from refusing to let others' limitations become your own. I never mentioned my family by name, but I held their gaze as I spoke. To those who've been called failures, who've been told to give up, who've been laughed at for choosing unconventional paths, you are not alone. Your voice matters, your dreams are valid, and sometimes the biggest obstacle to your success isn't lack of talent or opportunity. It's the people who should support you most. Caroline stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. 500 heads turned to watch her walk out, her heels clicking against marble. The cameras caught everything. "Respect is earned, not inherited," I continued, my voice steady. "And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is succeed in spite of those who bet against you." Richard's face was stone. Mom had her head in her hands. The judge's son, Caroline's fiancé, was staring at the door she'd fled through. "Tonight, we celebrate voices that refuse to be muted. Thank you for listening to mine." The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes, but I was already watching the fallout begin. Richard's business partners stepping away from him, Caroline's clients typing furiously on their phones. I found out what happened in the bathroom from 3 different sources. Caroline had locked herself in a stall, making frantic phone calls that echoed off marble walls. No, you don't understand. I didn't know. How could I know she was that Mia? Her assistant, Jennifer, who'd always been kind to me, was in there. She later told me Caroline threw her phone against the wall when the managing partner texted, "Your behavior toward your sister has cost us the Netflix account." They cited values misalignment. "We need to discuss your future at the firm." The $500,000 consulting contract with the media conglomerate, gone. The CEO had been in the audience, watched Caroline storm out during my speech, made his decision on the spot. "If she treats family that way, how does she treat clients?" he'd reportedly said. But the worst part for Caroline wasn't the lost business. Someone at Dad's birthday dinner, we never figured out who, had recorded her entire rant about my pathetic internet job. It was already spreading through legal circles on WhatsApp. "Partner at prestigious firm bullies sister, doesn't know she's Netflix star," was quite the headline in their insular world. Jennifer resigned the next week. When she applied to work for my production company, she told me something interesting. Caroline spent 3 days trying to do damage control. She called every partner, every client, tried to explain. But how do you explain publicly humiliating someone who's just been named UNESCO Youth Ambassador? The recording from the birthday dinner hit legal Twitter by morning. Caroline's carefully curated professional image, the youngest female partner, the brilliant negotiator, crumbled in real time. "She kept saying it wasn't fair," Jennifer said, "that you'd tricked her somehow." The board meeting was scheduled for Monday morning, emergency session. Robert Harrison, Dad's oldest friend and longest-serving board member, called me Sunday night. "Your father's in trouble, Mia. The board saw everything, the gala, the news coverage, that recording from his birthday dinner. They're questioning his judgment. The issue wasn't just personal embarrassment, it was professional competence." "If you can't recognize talent in your own family," Harrison quoted what another board member had said, "how can you recognize it in the company?" 3 major investors had reached out with concerns. One, a woman who controlled a $200 million fund, was particularly direct. "I've been listening to your daughter's podcast for 2 years. She built a media empire while Richard called her a failure. What other opportunities is he missing?" The recording from the birthday dinner became Exhibit A. Dad laughing while calling me the failure of the family, comparing me to a participation trophy, encouraging Caroline's cruelty, all while I had a $2 million Netflix deal in my pocket. "He kept saying he didn't know," Harrison told me. "But that's the point. He never asked, never looked, just assumed." The vote of no confidence came 2 weeks later, 7-3. Richard Anderson, who'd built his identity on being the infallible patriarch, the brilliant businessman, the man who could spot potential from miles away, was forced into early retirement because he couldn't see value in his own daughter. The Wall Street Journal ran a piece about it. Not about me, about him. Construction magnates fall, a lesson in leadership blind spots. They interviewed business school professors about the dangers of dismissing unconventional success. He never called me, not once. Caroline showed up at my apartment 6 weeks after the gala. No Hermes bag, no designer suit. She looked exhausted. "I need your help," she said. The inheritance documents were gone, shredded after that birthday dinner. But her problems remained. Without the $10 million loan, her plan to start an independent firm was dead. Worse, Whitman and Associates had put her on probation. 3 lost clients in 6 weeks will do that. "I could collaborate on your show," she offered desperately. "Legal perspectives on women's issues. I have expertise." "You told 50 people my career was a joke," I reminded her. "I didn't know." "That's exactly the point. You didn't know because you never asked. You never cared. You only care now because it affects you." She tried another angle. "The trust fund. If you could just sign something saying you support my loan application." "No." "Mia, please. My career is falling apart." I don't collaborate with people who don't respect my work, I said simply. That's a boundary I've set. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. The trust fund she tried to force me to abandon? Still intact, still requiring both signatures for any major decisions. She needed me now, and we both knew it. You're really going to let me fail? She asked. I'm not letting you do anything. You're experiencing consequences. A week later, I announced my donation. My entire trust fund share, $5 million, would go to fund education for girls in developing countries. Caroline couldn't touch it without my signature, and I'd never give it. She kept her partnership, barely. But the golden child narrative was over. Forbes ran the cover story first. The podcaster who shocked Silicon Valley. The article detailed my journey from failed startup founder to Netflix star, but what caught fire was the family angle they'd uncovered. Anderson declined to discuss her family's reaction to her success, they wrote. But sources confirm her father and sister were blindsided by her UNESCO announcement, having dismissed her career as playing on the internet. The Wall Street Journal followed. When family doubt meets global success, the Mia Anderson story. They'd somehow gotten quotes from people at Dad's birthday dinner. It was uncomfortable to watch, one guest said. They were so cruel and she just sat there knowing what was coming. Business Insider dug deeper, finding the connection between Caroline's firm losing the Netflix account and her treatment of me. Sources confirm Whitman and Associates was removed from consideration after Netflix executives learned of Caroline Anderson's public humiliation of her sister, who was already under contract with the streaming giant. The legal blogs were worse for Caroline. Partner's career implodes after bullying. Sister revealed as Netflix star stayed in the top spot for weeks. Screenshots of her LinkedIn profile views went viral, from 200 daily to 20,000. Everyone wanted to see the lawyer who'd humiliated her famous sister. Richard's fall was documented differently. Leadership lessons from the Anderson scandal became required reading at Harvard Business School. A case study in how bias and arrogance can blind leaders to innovation and talent. My Instagram following doubled to 30 million. But I never addressed the family situation directly. I didn't need to. The internet did it for me, turning them into cautionary tales about underestimating people. Caroline's reputation in legal circles never fully recovered. Mom came to my apartment 3 months after the gala. She brought tea, the same oolong she'd made when I was sick as a child. We sat in my studio, the one Caroline had mocked, surrounded by the equipment that built my empire. I've been listening to your podcast, she said quietly, since the beginning. I nearly dropped my cup. Episode 7, you talked about feeling invisible in your own family. I cried for hours. She pulled out her phone, showed me her subscription, 3 years old. I downloaded every episode, listened while your father was at work. Why didn't you ever say anything? Because I'm a coward. The admission came easily, like she'd practiced it. I chose comfort over courage, chose keeping the peace over protecting you. She'd known about the Netflix deal. Marcus Chen had called the house looking for me once, mentioned the project. She'd kept it quiet, wanting me to have my moment. When Caroline was humiliating you at that dinner, I wanted to scream, but I've been silent for so long I'd forgotten how to speak up. Tears ran down her face. You did what I never could. You stood up to them. It wasn't about standing up to them, I said. It was about standing up for myself. I'm proud of you for being stronger than I ever was. She reached for my hand. I failed you as a mother. I let them dim your light because I was afraid of conflict. Can you forgive me? I squeezed her hand. I forgive you, but I can't forget. And Sunday dinners are still off the table. She nodded. I understand. I'm just grateful you're still willing to see me at all. I sent the family email on a Tuesday, clear and professional. Moving forward, these are my boundaries. 1. Professional respect is non-negotiable. My career is not a topic for mockery or dismissal. 2. No financial discussions. I will not be treated as a backup plan or safety net. 3. Family gatherings are optional, not obligatory. My attendance depends on mutual respect. 4. Any public mention of me requires prior consent. 5. These boundaries are not suggestions, they are requirements. Caroline responded first, still trying to negotiate. This seems extreme. We're family. Family is a privilege, not a right to abuse, I replied. Dad didn't respond directly, but his lawyer did. A formal letter acknowledging receipt of my terms, written like a business contract. Even in personal matters, he couldn't just be a father. The extended family reached out differently. Cousins I hadn't heard from in years suddenly remembered I existed. My aunt, Dad's sister, called to say she'd always known I was special. Your father could never see past his own reflection, she said. I'm glad you didn't inherit that blindness. The most surprising response came from Caroline's ex-fiancé, the judge's son. He'd broken off the engagement after the gala, citing fundamental differences in values. He sent a simple note. Your speech changed my perspective on success. Thank you. I established new traditions, monthly dinners with Mom alone, coffee with cousins who'd always been kind but quiet, building relationships with family members who saw me as Mia, not as the failed Anderson daughter. The old family structure, built on hierarchy and conditional love, crumbled. What emerged was smaller but healthier, connections based on mutual respect rather than obligation. The Emmy sat on my bookshelf next to a photo from the UNESCO gala. Not the one of me on stage, but one Jennifer took backstage. Me, calm and composed, minutes before everything changed. Unmuted had become Netflix's most-watched documentary series. 30 million podcast subscribers. A production company with 50 employees, including Jennifer, who'd become my COO. We'd just signed a deal with Apple for our next project. Caroline had rebuilt, slowly. She'd left Whitman and Associates, started a small practice focusing on women entrepreneurs. She'd been in therapy for 2 years, according to Mom. Last month, she'd sent a genuine apology, not asking for anything, just acknowledging the harm she'd caused. I hadn't responded yet, but I kept the letter. Richard gave an interview to Fortune last year, his first since the board ousting. I failed to recognize innovation because it didn't look like what I expected, he'd said. My daughter built an empire while I was looking for skyscrapers. It was the closest he'd come to an apology. The birthday dinner video still circulated occasionally, usually with captions like, "This aged poorly," or "Imagine calling your daughter a failure while she has a Netflix deal." It had become a cautionary tale in business schools about unconscious bias and leadership blindness. I hired Caroline's former assistant, Jennifer, but also one of Dad's former board members as an advisor. Success isn't revenge, it's living well despite those who doubted you. My newest episode dropped this morning. When family becomes your first bully. 5 million downloads in 6 hours. The comments section filled with stories of recognition, healing, hope. Success isn't about proving anyone wrong, it's about proving yourself right. If this story resonated with you, you're not alone. Every successful person has faced doubters, often from those closest to them. Your dreams are valid, regardless of who believes in them. Please subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Comment below. What dream are others calling unrealistic? Let's support each other. And remember, the best response to disrespect is undeniable success. Until next time.